Good evening, everyone. My name is John Toles, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers. We're broadcasting tonight live from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We're here tonight to celebrate the virtual launch of Status Update by George Toles, illustrated by Cliff Eyland, edited by Thomas Toles. Your host this evening is Allison Gilmore. I'll be officially introducing all of this evening's participants in just a moment, but before I do, just wanted to go over a few very quick housekeeping notes for tonight. First of all, there will be time for questions from you, the audience, at the close of the event. So as questions occur to you over the course of the evening, please do feel free to enter them into the Q&A box. You'll find that located just at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And rest assured, you will not interrupt us in any way when you do put questions in there. They're much easier to find in the question box than in the chat, although I do encourage you all to chat amongst yourselves and send messages in the chat as well. At the close of the event, I'll be copying down the chat and sending it to all of the participants to ensure that they can all see all the lovely things you had to say and all the comments you had to offer tonight. Copies of Status Update are available for sale here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. As you will see from the sticker emblazoned on the front, Mr. George Toles has kindly come in to sign copies of the book. So those are available in limited number here at McNally Robinson Grant Park. We can deliver them within the city. You can pick them up in person. You can order them online. You can give us a call. We also ship everywhere. So feel free to send copies hither and yon. Now, I'll introduce this evening's participants, and so you don't have to stare at my face while I'm doing so, we'll show you them while doing so. George Toles is a distinguished professor of film and literature at the University of Manitoba. He is the author of A House Made of Light, Essays on the Art of Film, Paul Thomas Anderson, and the forthcoming Curtains of Light, Essays on the Metaphysics of Theatrical Space on Film. He has been posting mini narratives called Status Updates on Facebook every day since 2009. 2 collections of these updates with accompanying illustrations by artist collaborators will be published in the next year. George has written or co-written the screenplays for numerous feature films made by Canadian director Guy Maddin. These include Archangel, Careful, Twilight of the Ice Nymphs, The Saddest Music in the World, Brand Upon the Brain, My Winnipeg, and Keyhole. He also wrote the story and original screenplay for Canada's first stop-motion animated feature film, Edison and Leo. Cliff Eyland was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Eyland was a curator at the Technical University of Nova Scotia School of Architecture, DalTech, and freelanced for the Plug-in Institute of Contemporary Art in Winnipeg. From 1995 to 2005, Eyland was vice president of the board of Plug-in. In 1998, he was hired as an associate professor of painting at the University of Manitoba School of Art, and was also director of Gallery 111, both positions he held until 2010. Eyland was represented by Gurvich Fine Art in Winnipeg. His work is held at the University of Manitoba Archives and Special Collections. In 2020, his alma mater, Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, has set up the Cliff Eyland Memorial Scholarship for painting students and endowed by his family. Though his absence looms large this evening, his presence and his work looms even larger, and we're delighted to be celebrating it here tonight. Thomas Toles is an actor, writer, and comedian currently living in Chicago. He is a Rhodes Scholar with an MST in Film Aesthetics from University of Oxford. In addition to editing Status Update, his writing on film can be read in Film International and The Film Corner. He also does birthday parties. Finally, host Allison Gilmore is a Winnipeg-based freelance journalist and educator. As well as being a pop culture columnist for the Winnipeg Free Press, she has written on art, design, books, and film for The Walrus, Border Crossing, Canadian Notes and Queries, Canadian Geographic, Canada's History, The Globe and Mail, and The Winnipeg Review. She has taught in the History of Art program at the University of Winnipeg as a contract academic staff member, as well as in the University of Winnipeg's 55+ program and the McNally Robinson Community Classroom. Please join me in welcoming all of tonight's contributors.
Hello, everybody. I am so happy to be here. We're celebrating the release of this wondrous book tonight, but our glasses are not quite full because Cliff isn't here to celebrate with us. Although Cliff's partner, Pam Perkins, is here watching, which makes us very happy. So George, let's start by talking about your collaboration with Cliff and your friendship with Cliff. And I'm sure those two things are completely enmeshed. So let's talk a bit about the process. Oh, you have to unmute.
Maybe process first.
Sure.
And then some comments about the friendship. After I'd been doing daily updates for a couple of years, Cliff expressed interest enough at a breakfast we had at French Way that would there be sense in his doing an illustration or two just to see how that went. I mean, there was nothing resembling a long-term commitment. And sure enough, he always got to things immediately. And within a day or so, there were 2 or 3 illustrations for the most recent updates. And I expressed profuse gratitude and thought that would be the end of it. But Cliff then suggested with equal casualness, how many of these things have you done already? And I told her hundreds. He said, would you mind if I did illustrations for all of those and kept making illustrations on a day-by-day basis for the new ones? Taking a 5-second pause, I said, I don't think I'd mind that at all. And with his customary zeal and creative enterprise, he did this. Now, I should quickly point out that I'm not alone in being the recipient of Eyland largesse. I mean, so many artists and figures involved in fundraising efforts. I mean, libraries. I mean, the countless people have benefited from Cliff's kindness and creative. Well, I would say that always open faucet of his imagination. I mean, Cliff would, in any social setting, be carrying a packet of 3x5 cards, always that size, and would be drawing constantly. When I went to movies with him, even though it was pretty dark, there he was drawing. Who knows what prompted or inspired or what he was doing, but drawing was happening constantly. And so getting back to the update collaboration, he did a minimal conferencing with me or discussion at any stage about what exactly this collaboration was all about. The only thing that I said to him is that I don't want them to be direct illustrations. I wanted an oblique, indirect approach. And I would say that for me, aside from the stunning quality of his art pieces, that what I think it gives to the writing is an additional layer of mystery. If you could almost say it creates a visual subtext. So I think in the book form, one can happily linger over the pieces. Okay, well, that's the long answer to your question, but it was opening up the story of the friendship is something that would get me going for quite some time.
Okay. Well, yeah, what you say about Cliff, his generosity, he was generous in all ways, you know, intellectually generous, emotionally generous, just creatively generous, and curious. When I think of him, I think of curiosity, you know, in all its forms. And that really comes out, I think, in the collaboration. And I want to circle back to his work later, but the first question I want to ask is, what does it do when these texts and images shift from Facebook to like a hard copy, hold in your hand, put it on your coffee table, book. And I just want to give a shout out to At Bay Press, because this is a really beautifully made, like exuberantly designed book, I think, like, and the color, there's a lot of colors you think, oh, that color is not going to work. And then it works, you know, so it's just like the design is like constantly surprising. And the typefaces, there's one called Bungie and there's one called Beth Ellen, which sounds like a character in one of your microfictions, George. So yeah, how does the medium is the message thing work here?
Well, starting out on Facebook, my choice of it seemed like such a bargain basement medium. The lowest of the low in terms of where creative expression and artistry might improbably happen. But that was in some ways liberating for me, of just getting into the Wild West and deciding, status update. What in hell is that, or could it be? And although goodness knows there's tons of examples of micro-narrative short fiction out there, status update suggested a non-existent genre, which could be dealt with in whatever fashion I chose. I mean, if some days story, some days a mood piece, atmosphere, prose poem, anything really was fair game. And I really wanted to get a sense of discontinuity and surprise from day to day so it wouldn't settle into something predictable. Okay, that's Facebook. And after a few years, occasionally people suggested, well, why don't you consider taking some of these, or a great many, a few, and put them in book form? And well, once a book is a fact, it seems like an inevitability, but it really wasn't that. I mean, the whole idea of turning it into a book was seemed almost unimaginably difficult. I just couldn't, first of all, figure out how to make a selection, how to make a cut, what sort of order would be involved, and also how to pitch it to a publisher. I'm saying, well, we published it in Facebook first, but really it's good enough to go somewhere else. Anyway, when Matt Judry in his infinite kindness agreed to take this on, I thought that Thomas would be an ideal person to relieve me of all of this terrifying responsibility.
So
there were 1,600 or more Cliff illustrated updates, and well, I'll let Thomas pick up the story from there and what kinds of things faced you and how you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Thomas, like, how did you pick? Well, I mean, you can talk also about like working with your dad, but how did you pick from over like, you know, like thousands of updates? How did you make those choices, and how did you find that kind of the right edge between, you know, exploring some through lines? Like, you know, I find that like the dead dad entry is followed immediately by the dead mom entry, which, you know, so there's echoes, there are parallels, you know, there's.
Don't want to leave mom out.
Yeah. But you know, without getting too kind of organized and too categorical.
Yeah, no, it was a huge job. I was thinking, initially, like, we want to capture some of the chaos and spontaneity of Facebook. Like
Mhm.
when you're scrolling on Facebook, you will see something that, oh, that's kind of touching. And then you'll see someone being arrogant. And then you'll be like, is this person a fascist? And like, you go through so many different emotions in a Facebook feed. So I was hoping that the book would retain some of that kind of emotional jumping around. Like there would be a very kind of silly, humorous update followed by one that's very tragic. And so the contrast was something I was really on the lookout for. But yeah, there was this huge amount. And so the first thing I did is just read them start to finish. I went through all of them and I made like very basic notes on every update. I would highlight ones if I particularly liked the drawing or the writing or whatever it was. And then once I had like that big sweep, I had narrowed it down a little bit, but there were still hundreds to look at. And then I started thinking about which one of these feels kind of original. It doesn't feel like it's similar to another one. Which one does the art and the language complement each other nicely? And just anything that I found surprising or exciting that felt like, oh, I really haven't seen this angle before, I would put to the top of the list.
Okay.
And there's a few updates in there that I think are really disturbing and haunting, like the Vietnam War update. Really lingered with me for years. In fact, I remembered it before I reread from like, almost a decade before when it was first written. It was still in my brain. So when I saw it again, I was like, well, that one needs to go there. Yeah.
The text and image for that one that you're talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I want George to do some reading for us as well. But so this, there's a question from
You're breaking up,
Robert or Robert. Sorry?
You were breaking up for a few seconds.
Oh,
there.
yeah, sorry. I'm getting,
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
Back, yeah.
Okay. So this is from Robert, or maybe Robert. My question is about this idea of doing something daily as a kind of challenge. So the question is, where does this come from? Protestant work ethic, guilt, ambition, or? And yeah, I would say that the dailiness and the fact that you've never missed a day, right? Since you started? Never?
No, I haven't. In fact,
Amazing.
I
That's
had an
incredible.
operation last year, and my chief concern that day is that I would get an update in under the wire. But no, well, I would say change Protestant to Catholic work ethic. If there is
Okay.
such a thing, and all of the above are true. Well, okay, quickly. My brother was an editorial cartoonist for the Washington
Yes.
Post, and before that for some Buffalo newspapers. And he had a daily grind, whether the same topics were coming up politically over and over again. It didn't matter. He had to find some fresh angle and be funny. And my mother was constantly commending him for this. She said, George, you enjoy what you're doing for Thomas. It's just so burdensome. I mean, he feels shackled to it. And so I said to myself, I can be shackled too. Just as my father was to his upstairs desk, working every day of his life. I feared that if I didn't commit to it on a daily basis and said, well, if I don't feel like it today, well, I'll wait till inspiration comes, that I'd get lazier and lazier with it. It just seemed to me that the advantages of it were to be forced to get the writing wheels turning at some point in the morning. And also that pressure to post, not waiting for some hopelessly ideal version to realize itself, but to say it's good enough.
Yeah.
I mean, many times I'm unsure if something has quite hit the mark, rung the bell. And on such occasions, I always run it past Melissa.
Wise.
And just have her say, is this okay? Is it decent? Is it worth doing? If not, say so, and I'll try something completely different or try to fix this. And she's been exceedingly generous with her criticism. No, I mean, and her praise.
I just want to
more
add
praise.
that we included one update in the book that was not good enough, just to honor the Facebook, the original presentation. Not every update I picked was good enough to be in the book. There's one, and see if you can find it.
We all search for it.
Yes,
Yeah, okay, there you go.
This is an X marks the spot. See if you can figure out the one that nobody was thrilled to include.
Yes, well, yeah, and there may be 67 candidates for that choice. But the other thing is, going back to the anxiety factor, it's true that having done 4,600 or more of these, many days as I'm brushing my teeth or showering or eating cereal, and just the fear that nothing is going to start. Sometimes I have a good day with 5 or 6 ideas and I sketch them out so I've got some in reserve, but many times there's I just count on the morning suggesting something on the walk, or just reading something, a word, a phrase.
Okay. So it sounds like it's part drudgery and part liberation and part something going on with your brother. So
Yeah.
and mother. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that's okay. So let's get some reading and looking. Should we do that?
So Thomas, I think you had chosen some illustrations for some of the
Yeah, I can screen share while you read, but which one are you thinking of reading?
Let's see. Let's start with 2 one-sentence updates.
Those are my favorite.
Yeah, well,
Love them.
the long ones are no good. First one is a recent or fairly recent one-sentence update. It seems to me a one-sentence update either has to be funny or pack a punch. So this one, I feel, isn't funny, but it seems to show what a sentence can encompass. I think it's a good introduction to the update. He wanted to live like a well-placed thumbtack, holding up a beautiful poem, crinkled and yellow around the edges, on a familiar, inviting wall space touched by the sun. Okay, and now this one has a great illustration by Cliff, which has all sorts of moods swirling around inside the figure. It usually took him the first half of the day to figure out what he really wanted to do, and the rest of the day to discover why he couldn't possibly get around to it just yet.
I'd actually picked that one out because that is like, you wrote it in 2009, and that is my pandemic experience. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect.
Well, thank you. I think I have to say that Cliff's drawing manages, depending on your angle of approach or the mood, it's both ebullient and tragic at once. I mean, it seems to me, if you concentrate on the eyes, he seems sprightly. But if you come in some other way,
are defeated.
There's some sort of internal oil spill going on.
Yeah, he's caked in shit is how I interpreted it.
Okay, well, to go to something a bit lengthier, this one is...
Can you give me the page number, Dad?
Yeah, the responsibility, page 31.
Got it.
Okay.
This has a great visual too.
Dave wanted to get to the bottom of this responsibility thing. Until recently, he'd shared the common view that responsibility was what other people should take more of. But now it seemed it was his turn to take some responsibility. He needed to figure out what exactly he was responsible for. They used to say he was not responsible for his terrible upbringing, for his poverty, for the early death of his mother, for his father's drinking, for the lousy school he went to. He didn't think he was responsible for his heart condition, for the downsizing of the company he worked for the loss of his job or the difficulty he was facing getting another one. He had read some articles that told him he wasn't responsible for his children's unhappiness or poor choices past a certain point, or for the social conditioning he and they were daily subject to. The dismal values of the culture could not be laid more than a little bit at his door. Maybe what he was responsible for was not shutting up about his problems enough. Dave decided that he was voluntarily going to assume responsibility for the Second World War. Surely that would be more than his fair share. And he could go back to thinking about other things. That one, as I hardly need elaborate on, was the result of hearing a few too many people talk about responsibility, but again, aimed at other people. It just this what a strangely loaded, edgy word that is, and it's always a case of, it's a hot potato word. You always want to make sure somebody else takes it off your hands and does some of the responsibility work for themselves. Anyway.
I found it very sad that time, just hearing about all the problems in this person's life. It does feel like, yeah, he has done enough.
Began. I mean, so, okay, that was another one. A third, unless you have another question or comment, Allison, I by all means interrupt.
Okay, well, because we've had one longer one and a couple of short ones. So there's this journalistic joke. Okay, joke might be overselling it, but so an editor sees a columnist and says, I want 350 words on topic X on my desk in an hour. And the columnist says, that's not enough time to write that short, which is, I mean, basically saying it's much harder to write, to be concise and precise and really condense your message than it is to just go on and on, right?
So in terms of satisfying Facebook readers' attention span, I think,
yes.
I think the ones that are 2-sentence ones have the better shot at widespread approval. But that, of course, makes me think, to be able to hold a Facebook reader in thrall for a full paragraph, maybe even for a long paragraph, and what might that require?
Okay, so do you have a preference for writing short or long, or does it just?
I feel guilty if I write. I actually find the shorter ones most of the time easier to do. Okay. And I'm not saying that makes them better, but I feel after 3 or 4 short days that I feel obliged to do a longer narrative for whatever readers might be interested in something not necessarily more substantial, but let's say a little bit more plentifully detailed and with maybe more room for reversals and shifts of various kinds. I love nothing more than tone collisions, which are harder to achieve in a single sentence.
Well, I mean, you manage it sometimes. Here's one. She was so weary of him taking his good moods out on her, which is one sentence, sums up, I don't know, 40 years of marriage maybe, and has that clear reversal that you're so good at. That's one of my favorites. Okay. Okay, and now we have another question from Judith Owens. This question is for Thomas. I think she writes, the book keeps the dates of the original posts. Did you have this chronological order at all in mind in deciding how to organize the book? And then one for George, what surprises you in reading through the book about updates that have been extracted from whatever was going on in your day, your life when you wrote the original post? Interesting. So let's start with you, Thomas.
Yeah. So yeah, when I was making the initial selections, I didn't pay attention to the dates at all. And there is kind of a strangeness to the book because all of them come from this kind of 2 or 3 year period that they were being illustrated, which was from
Right.
several years ago. So they're not like the most modern updates, which I actually kind of like. I think one of the things pulling into this, which also I think reflects the Facebook experience, is it will flash reminders at you of people
Yes.
that you used to be in relationship with, or painful memories that you were happy about at the
It's a
time.
terrible feature.
Yeah,
It's a terrible feature.
the return of the repressed is a constant, but also that Mark Zuckerberg and cronies are just gathering your data permanently, that like everything you've ever shared will not go away. So I thought having the dates there was one way of reminding us of that element of the Facebook experience. But also, I don't know, I like just jumping around in time and having each one pinned down to a specific day, I think just helps to individualize them and make them feel like this was that day, we captured it. So whatever digital ephemera I left out on that day has been preserved in book form. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and George, so yeah, I mean, you're so good at surprising us, but yeah, what surprises you when you look back at the book?
It's strange how truthfully I'd forgotten that I'd written most of these. I mean, no, some of them came back, but some of them seemed, thankfully almost, to have been at least conceivably written by someone else, and it gave me a little bit more distance, perhaps. I would say it reminded me of early decisions in Facebook updates on the decision fairly early on to almost completely eliminate the first person.
Okay.
And to make it, sometimes use third person pronouns, occasionally, but maybe 3 or 4 times an I, but that would allow me maximum freedom of disguise. This could be autobiographical, it could be completely fictional, it could be some hybrid. And I guess I tried to take a sounding of as much as possible of my various states of mind, of trying to guess where I was, what kind of mood. It's strange that you don't have to be unhappy to write unhappy. In fact, you could be often in a great mood and then do Thomas Hardy as your counterweight for it. But sometimes it seems to me that feelings welled up in this familiar but also unfamiliar prose packet that gave me a perspective on not an entirely lost, but a forgotten aspect of myself. Okay. I don't know if that's a sufficient answer, but that's the best I can do right now.
I think that was pretty good. And maybe I should ask you this, Thomas, that did you sometimes organize it by text and sometimes arrange things according to visuals?
Yeah, I mean, I really tried to keep the two kind of married together because the pieces exist with both. The text is part of the visual, I think. But yeah, I definitely, I think in the organization would try to find, and I think, again, Matt deserves a lot of credit for the layout and the way that the pages look opposite each other. I think they're both kind of, it does that thing where it's both beautifully synthesis, but also kind of contrast. Like it has both things going on a lot of the pages, which I think is great and fits for the tone of the book. And yeah, it is a bit easier for me to categorize based on textual content. But I would definitely try to find the images that I don't know, Cliff had such a wide range of styles and mediums. There were some like pencil drawings, there were photographs, there were digital imagery. And so I would try to, promote that variety and spread it throughout the book so that if you flip open to a random page, you'll see something that you haven't seen anywhere else.
Yeah, and when you talk about them as illustrations, I mean, they're not really illustrations in the conventional sense. I mean, they riff, they respond, they expand, they illuminate, they wander around sometimes in their own, and they're not bound to your words in a kind of literal or one-to-one direct way at all, and they have their own mysterious lives, I think. But there is a connection, I think, forged, and sometimes that may be by the viewer reader, I think, and sometimes I start with the image and move to the text, and sometimes I start with the text and move to the image, and there's always this kind of vibrating thing going on between them, I think. Yeah, and I love, there's a lot of what seems like organic mess, but it's contained within that really strong line that he has, which is
the line,
exactly, the trophy of art.
The line.
And I think, that you're similar in the sense that both of you can compress these sort of layerings of character and shadings of mood into one image, like there's one where you bring in theology, and the illustration is like God is just like this, God the Father is this big barrel-chested thug, which I just think is a great image. And then just the way you have arranged things, Tom, is like there's sometimes you've got this really kind of loose biomorphic feel on one page, and then you turn the page over and there's like this super hard-edged abstraction, this really minimalist, which is great. Like there's one where you're writing about a possible car accident, George, and there's just these two angled spots suggesting, headlights maybe in the dark. That's a great image, and it works beautifully with the text.
There's a similar one with the night sky and the starlight that's got this big star shape stamp, basically, is the main visual there. And I love those minimal ones, especially how they work with the color on the page and the text, and it just fills it out.
I'd like to say that I have a much easier time remembering Cliff's images than my own text for whatever reason. I mean, the image, sometimes it's just sort of swimming through the image to get that little memory twig that reunites me with the writing act. But of course, I mean, on the one hand, there is all of this forgetting going on, but I have this hope, not a fixation, but a hope that I'm not merely repeating myself. I mean, which, of course, the longer you're at something, and with all of this, I realize that there are certain preoccupations, family first and foremost, which just will not be kept down. They just keep coming. Family is the gift that keeps on giving. It's my most cherished and inescapable subject, but still, a family is an inexhaustible realm, and there's so many different ways of doing family. But yeah, that sense of how to keep something that hasn't been stabilized, too often formulated, too neat, too reassuring, too predictable to wreck the whole process.
Right. And I mean, you play around with some literary forms and literary tropes, but it's not pastiche, you kind of approach it and then you tip it. Or
I think there's something of the mood. that I love in French movies of the New Wave and earlier with Renoir that somehow has been a kind of model for the update where you just never know where, say, Shoot the Piano Player is going to take you next. And I just love that, and especially if it manages to create a unity rather than just a mess of unsatisfyingly disparate impressions. I mean,
Okay.
but that sense that you can, if Thomas mentioned this hopping around within a short space is something that I find still a captivating challenge.
Okay.
Just to quickly
We're getting a few requests for more images.
Yes, I can just share some,
Yeah,
unless you want to do a reading, but I can just start sharing them as you talk.
Yeah, let's, yeah. And maybe there's a few questions stacking up, and we could maybe do those and then a few more readings maybe. So this is another one from Robert Lebossiere. What's the most number of likes you've got for an update, and which one?
I think I broke. Well, nothing compares with just posting a photograph of anything. I mean, that takes the lead over. But I would say, well, I think there was one that was 260, and I immediately decided, God, this must be terrible. No, I mean something that
was your immediate response.
Well, something that didn't give anyone pause, may not have been working hard enough, or might have fallen into that whimsy. But let me quickly say how grateful I am, deeply grateful to those people who consistently make the effort not just to read, but occasionally or very often click like or make a comment. I mean, to have no audience at all that is discernible would, I think, probably bring the project to a close. And I mean, I don't mean to be skeptical in the least. I was joking about that large number, but you do have to worry every time that something has been especially popular. I look at it and say, have I just written a meme or just something that, and I just think you have to, and I just don't want to revisit that well again in the interests of reaping the rewards. It's a pitfall to be overly concerned about.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
I can see that. Although there seems something Canadian about worrying that popularity is inherently bad.
No, it isn't inherently bad. No, I'm just saying that once you get it, and then the next day, there's almost no response. And then you have to keep your mind from saying, this no response means failure.
Okay.
Big response means wonderful. So I've got to start imitating that. I just think that way is the death of it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Next thing I know, I'll be doing whimsy.
God forbid that you should do it. Okay, here's a question from Rob Gardner. Thomas encouraged inappropriate questions on Facebook. What else do you do on Facebook other than post these status updates, and how much extra time is spent scrolling?
Too much time probably scrolling. I mean, I feel that was that to Thomas?
No, I think it's to you.
Well, I think the first part was Thomas, and then to you. Yeah. So yeah. I
like to have on the wall, in addition to the posts and a few from memories from the Facebook allows you to retrieve things from that day. However, I post some of those, but I love to post paintings and poems, some that friends have posted, and just to make it something other than, the usual conspicuous, I don't know, chest thumping thing that Facebook kind of seduces you into doing. And but no, I just think and I have a mission, I guess, to get more people to pursue serious reading. And so I try to promote great comments from writers' interviews or passages from books. And so I guess that takes a little bit of selecting time. Sometimes I just copy stuff that I'm reading, but I would say, as with everyone, probably too much time is spent scrolling and doing whatever I'm doing.
To give you a little credit, Dad, you write very detailed personal birthday messages to thousands of people every
That's
day.
true, actually.
Nobody else has ever done
that.
Yeah.
I did. Well, thank you for.
They are not generic. That is true. Ariel Gordon asks, have the dates turned into titles for the individual pieces? And where do the titles from the kind of table of contents come from?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's kind of a funny origin, because I gave most of the pieces very haphazard little titles so I could remember which one was which when I was organizing them. And then when I sent them to Matt, he just used those as the table of contents. I didn't even know that was going to happen. And there were some that I felt I had misnamed, but a lot of the titles that were just my notes were kept. And I actually think the sort of simplistic jot note, quick description of what each one was a great way of helping people to find them based on these like little textual samples from the longer piece. So it was kind of an accident, but I actually really loved that.
I thought they were great, Thomas.
Yeah, and the table of contents page is organized in such a cool way with
it's gorgeous,
sort of jumping around.
Yeah. Now this is a great question from someone who prefers to remain anonymous. Do you think of these pieces as particularly cinematic? Oh, actually, this is kind of a cinematic image right here. I don't have that sense with many writers, but with these posts, I often feel like I'm getting a film clip.
Well, when I gave up doing screenwriting, I teach film, so films are, I would say, inordinately part of my process. I would say at times I look at, say, the one sentence updates as a version of a movie pitch. Just to condense it to that one thing, tell me more. But also, yes, frequently I can feel as something goes along that it's becoming a scene, and I try to balance, I suppose, that the cinematic detail with the kind of thing that literature does. That you don't want to over saturate the little narratives with detail, but to put in, as in a screenplay, enough single prompting charged words that get the reader to see what's there and more.
But also gaps,
gaps as well.
Here's a question from Candace Ball for George. Do you have any favorite writing prompts?
Certainly a big one is to take a word or allow a word to arise of its own accord and allow it to be a kind of magnet for associations. And so to let a word be the centerpiece for a kind of world, and just words. And so I hold on to the word for a couple of days, maybe, and then I've got a recent example of this, and I haven't read for a bit. So if you'll
Yes,
allow me,
great.
the word. This is a fairly recent one. In fact, very recent. The word "instead" struck me all of a sudden as a word that I really liked, but not always. If people are saying, let's not do that, let's do this instead. But if you're the person who proposed the first thing, but then instead is also can get you out of a bad space. Instead of being this, why not that? And so that was the starting point for it. And here's the piece. Instead was a beautiful word when it led to pleasing alternatives. So many of the descriptions of what life would be like when things got back to normal struck Francis as woefully deficient in imaginative splendor. Francis's approach to instead tried to make up for that. Instead was a place he invented just beyond Wakahoro, New Zealand. He put a colored pin on a map to firm up its location. It could be filled with life improvements that appeased immoderate dispositions. There was a cave of deep secrets, ponds where ducks in liquid shadow bred reveries of hope, and valleys that shimmered with blue butterflies and confidence. Ruby lights came on when people removed their clothes, and whippoorwills sang hosannas to swimming holes swarming with graceful nudity. Easter egg hunts were not confined to Easter, but were monthly rituals, followed often by scavenger hunts, whose clues led to dark groves where true and nearly true love blossomed. Collections were all the rage. Thimbles, spools, lawn boulders, wooden masks, keys, postcards sent by forgotten men and women, desert landscapes for model trains, bridal bouquets, arrowheads, and moon statues with deep-set eyes. Children found the right things to be haunted by. Reason and emotion became the perfect couple, and art's meanings were, to nobody's surprise, the same as realities. Instead, old-fashioned nightclubs with swing bands were a paradise for dancers, where everyone kept coming up with new ways to move in answer to their partner's rhythm. The words to the ravishing melodies were engraved in the hearts of whoever needed them, ready to be planted softly as a star in the ear of the one who held you. Okay, so that was the word instead as a word that took on unexpected power as you just stayed with it.
Yes, absolutely. That was beautiful. Okay, I think we only have time for just maybe one more question and then maybe one more reading. So although I'm sure we could go on and on.
I know I could.
This is from Ann Bennett. George, Facebook entries come with the reality of instantaneous reader response. It must be lovely to know so quickly that your work has touched people, but is the feedback ever annoying?
I've been incredibly fortunate, and really since 2009, there's one student who used to go to high school with me, who was a Trump supporter and many other things, a religious zealot who made a point of just going after updates. But a quick defriending took care of that. But really, I have been amazed at how little people have said that would just get me stewing or just anxious or annoyed. They've been very, very kind. And so you can hear credible horror tales from thousands of people of just so much nastiness on Facebook. I mean, I know that it's there in quantity, but I have not been done in by this seemingly ubiquitous phenomenon.
Okay.
So,
well, that is encouraging, actually. I guess, does everyone want to just kind of make a final statement, and then we'll wrap up, I guess. I guess one of my final statements would be that it's been wonderful to gather and to be able to talk about this book, and the only thing that would have made it better would be if Cliff were here to talk about his work. And talk about anything, really, because he could talk about anything with such knowledge and insight and humor and wit. And
everyone who knows Cliff would immediately say he had the best laugh of any human being on earth. Making Cliff laugh was pretty easy, but man, oh man, the payoff of that laugh never was less than ecstatic. And I played Peter Pan at the beginning of my theatrical life, age 10 or 11, in neighbors' garages, singing the Mary Martin songs. But I realized when I met Cliff that I'd gotten it all wrong. Cliff, and only Cliff, knew how to be Peter Pan. And
yeah. Well, yeah, because he was curious about everything and never stopped being curious about, like quantum physics, the human condition, everything. Yeah.
Yes, everything. But he did it. He had this unfaked, unforced, childlike. I don't want to use the overworked word wonder, but it was just a childlike exhilaration. I mean, a capacity for joy and delight in just about everything. Even when he was being critical, he seemed joyful.
Yeah. Okay. Thomas, do you want to say anything else, or?
I think you guys did a great job. I'm just grateful to be here. And in the spirit of Facebook, we are going to update the book regularly, change the interface just to sort of piss everybody off every 6 months. We're going to release a new version that you don't know where the buttons are, the old update you can't find. We're going to try to honor that.
Well, I mean, there is so much more material there from George and from Cliff. You could make.
Yes, actually, we could make a lot more of these.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you want to read one more, Dad? I could.
Yeah.
Do you have time for it? Maybe I'll just do the closing one, which doesn't have an image, but it's Thomas felt it was an appropriate acknowledgement of, well, the end of aberration.
Oh, yeah.
To be misunderstood by someone you love is to feel like a child. To be humiliated or embarrassed is to feel like a child. To jump into a pool that's too cold is to feel like a child. And so it is for other things. To make mistakes, to not remember the answer, to have a joke fall flat, to toss and turn at night in fear, to lose one's way, to be caught up in a book, to roast marshmallows, to have gorged on food, to spy on a neighbor or co-worker. And of course, to be dying is to feel like a child.
That's a good place to end, I think. Thank you so much. Thank you for including me, especially.
Thank you for agreeing to do this. You're the best host in the business.
Okay, and thank you everyone who joined us out there. And continue to join George on Facebook. And okay, good night.
Thank you. Thank you, John. And thank you, Matt, for such a superb design.
Yes, thank you everybody for coming.
For being
Yes,
willing.
and thanks to McNally's.
McNally Robinson.
Yes, our refuge in difficult times.
Yes.
And thanks everybody, George, Allison, Thomas, and everybody who attended. It was, just my great pleasure to be able to even put this book out, to just a dream come true, really, to work with Thomas, George, and Cliff. Yeah, thanks again to everybody who attended. Really appreciate it.
Exactly. And I'll just close by offering my own gratitude without reiterating everybody's names, everybody involved, this incredible panel, everybody for joining us. Thank you all for your incredible questions, your comments. Rest assured, I'll send all those comments to the panelists so they can take them in at their own pace, including some of the unanswered questions that we didn't have time to get to. Again, the book is Status Update, filled with the incredible words of George Toles and the unbelievable art of Cliff Eyland. So copies are available at McNally Robinson in the spirit of naked capitalism, and we will ship them to you wherever you might be. Thank you to Ad Bay for putting this incredible book out. Have a lovely night, everybody. Take care.
Good night.